Badlands. Explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
All right, welcome everybody to this week's edition of Movie Nights with Matt, me, and today we're going to do something a little bit different in the sense that we're going to watch something that Cynthia, myself, and our collaborator David Goslin had put together over the course of several months. It's called Edgar Allan Poe's Final Mystery, A Tale of Two Murders. And the reason why we're choosing to do this today is because it's Edgar Allan Poe's birthday. It's the actual anniversary of his birth, and it's January 19th. And we thought it would be an auspicious moment to remove the paywall. So for the first time after this was released publicly about 4 months ago, however, we decided, no, 3 months ago. But now for the first time, we decided to celebrate Edgar Allan Poe's birthday. We're going to remove the paywall and make it freely available for all to watch. However, it's a long film. It's about 100 minutes long, the longest film we've yet made, and as such, our time slot tonight will not permit the full screening of the show. However, like I said, it is fully available, and what I discussed with Cynthia, who will be on with me later on. She's going to come on and watch the movie with us, and then we'll chat a little bit with each other, and hopefully you guys out in the audience. We'll throw a question or two or share a useful thought that we can also chew on and fuse into the dialogue. But we'll play the first 58 minutes. So that's what we'll do. We're going to play about an hour, and then we're going to stop it at a certain cliffhanger moment. Hopefully, what I'm hoping is that everybody will be so revved up that they're going to want to go to our YouTube page and watch the full film and share it. Press the like, comment on it, share it, but really get it out there, because we're unveiling completely new revelations pertaining to what Edgar Allan Poe was a part of that will blow your mind. Our research has, I think, really done something quite unique in both identifying the political, patriotic intelligence networks that Poe was a part of. We've been able to reevaluate a lot of his poetry, his short stories, and even his philosophical essays from the standpoint of a battle over ideas, over what the nature of humanity would be, what the nature of the New Republic would be. And a lot of this has to do with the patriotic battle against the Rosicrucian black magicians. That's right, I said it. The sorcerers, the heirs of the Knights Templar, the Gnostic Satanists who had infused and taken control of most branches of various secret societies of the day in which Poe lived, and the battles that had taken place against this agency of evil was something that is, you have to understand that even happened, which most people completely ignore, in order to properly appreciate what Poe was doing and who killed Poe and why. So, without saying any more, I'm going to read 2 ads, and then we're going to jump into the movie, and then we'll talk about it. So the first ad here is River. I said it's River. Stack Sats with River. The Bitcoin-only platform built by Bitcoiners for Bitcoiners. Why River? Zero fee recurring buys. Stack Bitcoin effortlessly, hourly, daily, weekly, monthly. 3.5% Bitcoin interest on cash, FDIC insured, no minimums, withdraw anytime. Expert US-based support, human help plus private client service for big buys of $100,000 or more. Business accounts, boost your balance sheet with Bitcoin and earn 3.5% paid in Bitcoin. Top-tier wallet, send, receive, and manage Bitcoin securely. Unmatched security. Full reserve custody, multi-sig cold storage, and proof of reserves. Join the Bitcoin revolution at badlandsmedia.tv/river and earn real returns. That's badlandsmedia.tv/river. All right, the next one is Trezor. Your crypto deserves the ultimate protection, and Trezor delivers just that. Trezor offers a secure and user-friendly solution for managing your digital assets. It delivers on its promise of robust security, providing a crucial layer of protection against online threats and unauthorized access. Since 2014, over 2 million users have trusted Trezor, the world's first hardware wallet, to secure their Bitcoin, Ethereum, and over 9,000 other coins and tokens. With state-of-the-art encryption and offline storage, Trezor keeps your assets safe from hackers, malware, and exchange breaches. Its open source design ensures transparency, while the Trezor Suite app makes managing your portfolio a breeze. Buy, sell, swap, and track with ease. Designed with simplicity in mind, Trezor ensures that even now, those new to cryptocurrency can navigate its features with ease. With Trezor, you can confidently manage your cryptocurrencies, knowing that your digital wealth is protected by industry-leading security protocols. Visit badlandsmedia.tv/Trezor to get your Trezor and safeguard your crypto with confidence. That's badlandsmedia.tv/Trezor. All right, so without further ado, let's watch a movie. Never mind, I've screwed something up. I'm going to try to fix everything right now. So give me one moment, and I will make this thing work, I promise. Aha.
The name Edgar Allan Poe conjures images of the macabre, murder, insanity, and self-destruction. But is this the real Edgar Allan Poe? Despite countless documentaries on the life of one of America's most celebrated writers, one inevitably encounters the same cartoonish narrative of a disturbed soul plagued by haunting visions, substance abuse, and fascinations with morbidity. The true sublime depth of Poe's mind and the strategic political nature of his most famous works is almost always buried under the slew of Halloween-grade caricatures and morbid characterizations. But that's all about to change. What follows is the true story of America's purloined soul, Edgar Allan Poe, and a true account of the double murder of one of America's foremost literary geniuses, first in body, then in memory. On October 3rd, 1849, Edgar Allan Poe was found incoherent, wearing someone else's clothing, and most likely poisoned in Baltimore, Maryland. Within hours, he was admitted to a hospital, put under isolation in a hospice, and permitted no visitors for several days. By October 7th, the great poet was dead. On October 8, 1849, Poe's nemesis Rufus Griswold wrote a toxic national eulogy.
Edgar Allan Poe is dead. He died in Baltimore the day before yesterday. This announcement will startle many, but few will be grieved by it. There seemed to him no moral susceptibility, and what was more remarkable, in a proud nature, little or nothing of the true point of honor. He had, to a morbid excess, that desire to rise, which is vulgarly called ambition, but no wish for the esteem or the love of his species. Only the hard wish to succeed, not shine, not serve, but succeed, that he might have the right to despise a world which galled his self-conceit.
By a strange series of events, Griswold somehow managed to become Poe's official biographer, forging false letters attributed to Poe's hand. He even became the literary executor of Poe's estate, purchasing all of his personal letters from the author's impoverished aunt, and then painting the image of a drunken, death-obsessed, egotistical opium addict for all posterity. Less than 2 years later, Griswold also became the principal narrative controller of the biographies of Poe's lifelong friend, James Fenimore Cooper, author of the famous novels The Last of the Mohicans, The Spy, and The Bravo, whose untimely death in 1851 also smelled of poisoning. Griswold even chaired a committee memorializing the life of Cooper. But why would anyone go to such lengths to murder one of America's foremost men of letters twice, first in body and then in character? Poe was a literary figure, but was he something more? Audiences have been led to believe Poe's fictional pieces were simply the product of his own sick mind, something the notoriously deviant French writer and Poe translator Charles Baudelaire was convinced of. If the popular image is any indication, the world has yet to shed the vestiges of the false Poe mythology. In this light, revisiting Poe's works and the project of his final years should be seen as a question of historical justice, not merely a literary matter. As a leading literary figure in the young American Republic, Edgar Poe understood that in the war for human freedom, culture is everything. He was writing at a time when the nascent republic's victory over the ancient forces of empire was still very fragile. It was clear to Poe that a society which tolerates a culture of immorality and mediocrity, where irrationalism and emotions defined the boundaries of truth, is a society destined to lose its powers of judgment, of differentiating between good and evil, healthy and sick minds, and sublime and perverse imaginations. Poe had always been fascinated by the nature of mind, identity, and the harmonies or disharmonies that generate healthy and unhealthy states of being. His short stories often explored the mind's capacity to fall into perversions of its higher divine nature. In the same way any doctor inquires into the multifaceted nature of illness before coming to a clear conception of health, so too must Poe's haunting tales of the macabre be inspected. Whether we are investigating the inner workings of the minds of protagonists of such tales as The Imp of the Perverse, The Telltale Heart, The Cask of Amontillado, The Black Cat, or William Wilson, Poe always offers us insight into the self-deluding mind of a sick soul, and most importantly, how ignorance of one's own undiagnosed self-delusions always quite lawfully lead to one's own downfall. In the story William Wilson, an elite young philandering playboy cannot comprehend why an evil doppelganger has followed him for years, undoing his efforts to cheat, lie, and steal at will. After being tortured by this gnawing figure who shares his appearance and even his name, William Wilson finds himself ragefully stabbing his enemy, only to discover that his enemy was always himself, or at least a conscience which he chose to ignore and treated as the villain. A similar motif can be found in The Imp of the Perverse, where a narrator muses about the perfect murder of an unnamed victim. Despite evading authorities for many months after committing what he believes is the perfect crime, the narrator recounts how something he suspects to be an imp possessed him like a demon, resulting in a public confession amidst hundreds of witnesses. As the reader discovers, the narrator awaiting his execution is made clear that the murderer never realized that this imp was always his oppressed conscience, which acted much like a force of natural law upon the perpetrator. The same theme is treated in The Telltale Heart, where another murderer carries out a gruesome killing of a rich old man whom he served. As police arrive at the door for a general inspection, the killer who has buried the old man below the floorboards finds himself compelled by a force somehow beyond his control to invite the police officers in for tea, only to be haunted by the growing, throbbing of a beating heart below the floorboards. Or is it the beating heart within his own chest? The drumming of the heart overwhelms the killer, who falls apart, admitting to the crime in front of the police, who quickly discover the gruesome scene below the floorboards. Even though these and other famous stories are used to support the notion that Poe was simply obsessed with crime and murder, the fact remains that the theme is never death or crime, but rather the consequence of ignoring the reality of conscience and the higher justice from which no one can escape indefinitely. Without a genuine awareness of the potential for evil and self-deceit within each of us, or the evil that may infiltrate and corrupt not only institutions, but entire nations, even the greatest intellects could find themselves prey to the most heinous and evil perversions, as we'll soon see. The story of Poe's descent into the maelstrom, published in 1841, showcases this sublime power in an acute manner. Within this tale, three brothers find themselves fishing near an unnamed harbor when all of a sudden the sky darkens, a violent storm emerges, and the tranquil sea transforms into a vicious whirlpool, slowly sucking all into the abyss of its dark vortex. One of the three brothers is immediately lost to the sea, while the two surviving brothers attempt to find anything on the boat to grab onto. Amidst the terror, one brother loses his mind and pushes his sibling off of a metal grip at the center of the boat, leaving the other to fall to the floor. Yet the brother who has been pushed does not lose his mind, and despite the terror and chaos of the slowly spinning towards the center of the maelstrom, he takes the time to recognize that the lighter debris and wood never sinks to the center of the whirlpool, but descends only to a limited depth, while heavier and bulkier objects, such as trees or the boat on which both brothers find themselves, are drawn deeper into the center and destroyed. Attempting to teach his younger brother is futile, as his young, terrorized mind has no place for reason, resulting in the elder brother leaping off the boat, holding only a light wooden barrel, and watching sadly as his younger brother perishes on the doomed boat. The lesson is clear. Amidst a crisis, only he who is capable of holding to reason and who has educated his emotions has a chance to survive. Those who lack the emotional fortitude will always be doomed when crisis hits. on the higher quality of evil which any lover of freedom must guard against if he wishes to understand the nature of the forces haunting America's own corridors of power. Poe brilliantly lays the perverse and tragic oligarchical psyche bare in his stories The Fall of the House of Usher and The Mask of the Red Death. In the former story, a young, depressed European nobleman named Roderick Usher invites a childhood friend to his family's Gothic castle, wherein Usher yearned to find a glimmer of that happiness last experienced during his childhood. Roderick embodies the stagnant and fixed psychological impulses of European nobility as he finds himself stuck between two worlds, the new world of technological progress, optimism, and creative growth in which his friend lives, and which characterized in so many ways 19th century America, and the archaic fantasies of the past grandeur of Roderick's high bloodline, embodied in the image of the derelict and crumbling castle. Ultimately, Roderick is unable to break from his hereditary roots, and the story ends with the disintegration of the castle with the sad, barren twins inside. Roderick and his creepy sister symbolize the end of oligarchical systems. In The Mask of the Red Death, Poe performs a similar exposure of the self-destructive nature of oligarchs who may try to avoid the plagues which their rapacious systems of exploitation inevitably bring on. Even hermetically sealed as they were within their castles, living in orgiastic decadence, they ultimately couldn't escape the destruction which they believed was only reserved for their slaves. Time after time, and following the guiding light of all great tragedians, Poe demonstrates how the inability to experience a quality of creative change within one's heart and mind is almost always the cause of the dismal outcomes depicted in his morbid stories. Rather than tales of death or murder, they are a testament to the sublime human faculty which none of us can deny, and none of us can ignore when faced with imminent tragedy. And this leads us to one of Poe's most celebrated series, his detective stories, a genre which he created. In The Purloined Letter, the third of Poe's three famous tales of ratiocination, the character Inspector C. Auguste Dupin embodies the highest caliber of creative healthy mind, which is contrasted with the French prefect and an armada of police officers who are locked in the invisible cage of sterile deductive inductive logic, forever unable to make a discovery and solve a mysterious criminal case. An exasperated French prefect seeks the assistance of Dupin after weeks of painstakingly searching the home of a figure who is the prime suspect in the theft of a letter which holds vast political ramifications and vast rewards if it is recovered. The inspector describes in agonizing detail how his officers have spent weeks taking apart every segment of the suspect's home in search of the letter, but to no avail. The prefect describes how his men have investigated every square inch of the residence.
We took our time. First, we examined the furniture in every room. We opened all the drawers. We looked under the rugs. We searched behind all the paintings on the walls. We opened every book. We removed the boards of the floor. We even took the tops off the tables to see if he had hidden the letter in the table legs. But we cannot find it. What do you advise me to do?
Every technique of inquiry known to them has been exhausted, and their failure has caused them to seek Dupin's help. After several days, Dupin uncovers the letter and gives it to the prefect, who giddily pays Dupin the generous reward, leaving the inspector's home, letter in hand. Dupin's friend and the story's narrator sits awestruck as to how this feat occurred. Dupin then explains how he was able to accomplish the seemingly impossible task by first sharing his insight into the failures of the thinking of the prefect and officers.
The prefect and his cohort fail so frequently, first by default of this identification, and secondly by ill admeasurement of the intellect with which they are engaged. They consider only their own ideas of ingenuity, and, in searching for anything hidden, advert only to the modes in which they would have hidden it. They are right in this much, that their own ingenuity is a faithful representative of that of the mass. But when the cunning of the individual felon is diverse in character from their own, the felon foils them, of course. This always happens when it is above their own, and very usually when it is below. They have no variation of principle in their investigations. At best, when urged by some unusual emergency, by some extraordinary reward, they extend or exaggerate their old modes of practice without touching their principles.
Dupin reveals that the stolen letter was hidden in plain sight, ripped and wrinkled on a card box sitting in open view near a desk, visible to all eyes, but invisible to old defective minds obsessed with deductive analysis. Dupin elaborates upon the superiority of the culprit's creative mind, saying,
I know him well. He is both. As poet and mathematician, he would reason well. As mere mathematician, he could not have reasoned at all, and thus would have been at the mercy of the prefect.
It was Dupin's insight into the failure of linear mathematical logic and the healthy maturation of scientific and aesthetic capacities that the true creative leaps into discovery concepts may occur. Although expressed most transparently in the Purloined Letter, this theme is replicated beautifully in Poe's short stories The System of Dr. Tar and Professor Feather, Meisel's Chess Player, The Murders on the Rue Morgue, and The Gold Bug, to name but a few. But despite the success of his many riveting stories, Poe still had an even greater creative aspiration, which he was about to realize just before his life was mysteriously cut short. When Edgar Poe died, he was en route from Virginia to New York, where he had planned to set up a new type of magazine over which he would have full control, known as the Stylus. Having tirelessly collected $1,500 in subscriptions from supporters in Virginia, Poe was finally about to embark upon a new phase of his life's mission, which he had described as
the one great purpose of my literary life.
Adding,
undoubtedly, unless I die, I will accomplish it.
Poe's creation of his own magazine would liberate him from the shackles of editorial constraints for the first time in his life. Following the guiding model of Benjamin Franklin's Poor Richard's Almanac and his beloved Friedrich Schiller's journal, Thalia, Poe's new magazine was to provide a cultural mass education of the population using drama, poetry, science, and the arts, as well as acting as a platform for great Republican artists and thinkers to rally around during a time of profound crisis in America's history, teetering as it was upon the precipice of dissolution, which would explode within a matter of 12 years in the form of the Civil War. Describing his new journal, Poe stated in his prospectus,
The Stylus will include about 100 royal octavo pages in single column per month, forming 2 thick volumes per year. In its mechanical appearance, it will far surpass all American journals of its kind. It will discuss not only the belles lettres, but very thoroughly the fine arts, with the drama, and more in brief, will give each month a retrospect of our political history. It will enlist the loftiest talent but employ it not always in the loftiest, at least not always in the most pompous or puritanical way. It will aim at affording a fair and not dishonorable field for the true intellect of the land, without reference to the mere prestige of celebrated names. It will support the general interests of the Republic of Letters and insist upon reading the world at large as the sole proper audience for the author. It will resist the dictation of foreign reviews. It will eschew the stilted dullness of our own quarterlies, and while it may, if necessary, be no less learned, will deem it wiser to be less anonymous and difficult to be more dishonest than they.
Poe's intention to break the practice of anonymous authorship was especially important in the 1840s, as magazines like the Southern Literary Messenger and Graham's Magazine rarely published their authors' names, and this anonymity made it extremely easy to slander and lie without remorse, to the detriment of the minds and morals of the population, and thereby the nation's moral fitness to survive. Poe was about to go into the next phase of a culture war with a powerful printing press based in New York City, influential patriotic allies, and a mission to inspire and create the kind of American culture that would make mob rule and social manipulation an impossible task for America's enemies. Of course, America's foes knew they would have to do everything possible to ensure no such culture would ever be permitted to fully take root in the young republic. In an 1842 editorial, Poe called out this British subversion of America's moral culture, writing,
"We know that the British bear us little but ill will. We know that in no case do they utter unbiased opinions of American books. We know that in the few instances in which our writers have been treated with common decency in England, these writers have either paid homage to English institutions or have had lurking at the bottom of their hearts a secret principle at war with democracy. We do indeed demand the nationality of self-respect. In letters, as in government, we require a declaration of independence. A better thing still would be a declaration of war."
What were these British imperial operations which Poe identified and against which he called for a declaration of war? Were they being run by British Republican-minded circles associated with, say, a Keats or Shelley? Was it the earlier literary projects of a Milton or Shakespeare, a Thomas More or Thomas Paine? Since Poe wrote extensively of his love of these writers, we can safely say that another darker literary current in England was in Poe's sights, in which he saw as a grave threat to the American Republic. So who was running these operations? To answer this question, we must come to review a new organization that was penetrating into the USA at this period, the Young America Movement. In the USA, there were two Young Americas seated to carry out this self-cannibalizing mission, the Young America North and Young America South. Where one branch was centered in New England and catered to the abolitionist mindset, the Southern branch was centered in Virginia and catered to those who preferred to defend the institution of human chattel slavery. While the Southern branch of Young America soon took the form of the Confederate leadership, led by such figures as Colonel George Saunders, America's ambassador to England during the presidency of Franklin Pierce, and General Albert Pike, a Grand Master of Scottish Rite Freemasonry, who later co-founded the Ku Klux Klan. The Northern branch of Young America would be led by Ralph Waldo Emerson. The Young America movement emerged out of the Democratic Party during a period when the young USA was still trying to establish its own sovereign culture in the face of the still dominant intellectual, cultural, and economic influence of the British Empire. Emerson published a manifesto called Young America in 1844. There he showcased his disdain for the Constitution of the USA and even called for its dissolution, an objective shared by Albert Pike and the leadership of emerging Confederate states. Emerson wrote,
"At this moment, the terror of old people and of vicious people is that the union of these states be destroyed, as if the union had any real basis in the good pleasure of a majority of its citizens to be united. But the wise and just man will always feel that he stands on his own feet, that he imparts strength to the state, not receives security from it, and if all went down, he and such as he would quite easily combine in a new and better constitution."
But who was Ralph Waldo Emerson, really? Emerson was not only the leader of Young America, but upon his return from England in 1833, he was also the founder of a new movement dubbed Transcendentalism, which had formed a vastly influential cult in the USA around the Gnostic British intellectual Thomas Carlyle, then editor-in-chief of the Edinburgh Review. During his time in England, Emerson was trained intensely by Sir Thomas Carlyle, whom he regarded as his mentor and spiritual guide. Along with the Blackwoods magazine, the Edinburgh Review would serve as the standard-bearer of literary taste, and both outlets promoted Transcendentalism as a new form of mysticism, which, as we'll soon discover, was nothing but a thinly disguised version of very ancient Gnostic paganism. Poe fought against this movement throughout his life, for reasons that will become clear. Poe was highly critical of Carlyle in particular. He considered him a plagiarist filled with monstrous, unblushing egotism, someone who Poe said prioritized mysticism for mysticism's sake. Poe identified Carlyle as one of the greater propagators of Transcendentalism, which contributed to what he described as the sophistry and pretension he found among the American Transcendentalists. In one critique, Poe apparently wrote,
"His remedy is herohood. What is this but inane twaddle monstrous unblushing egotism is one of Carlyle's striking characteristics. Great and learned men, astronomers, philosophers, and others are poor scientific babblers. He alone, it would seem, discerns the reality of things, and has the key to the mysteries of nature. Insight has been granted to no other."
Although known for his use of flowery language promoting personal freedom and equality, like his mentor Thomas Carlyle, Emerson's elitist secret doctrine was maintained throughout his long career and outlined explicitly in his college diaries, where he wrote,
"I believe that nobody now regards the maxim that all men are born equal as anything more than a convenient hypothesis or an extravagant declamation. For the reverse is true, that all men are born unequal in personal powers and in those essential circumstances of time, parentage, country, fortune. The least knowledge of natural history of man adds another important particular to these, namely what class of men he belongs to: European, Moor, Tartar, Africa, because nature has plainly assigned different degrees of intellect to these different races, and the barriers between are insurmountable.
In this regard, Emerson's concepts of the USA were no different from the racist vision held by his Southern young American counterparts. Like all occult societies, the Transcendentalists were devoted to a public and secret doctrine, with a public phase promoting spiritualism, while the inner elect advanced the revival of the ancient mystery cults, Gnosticism, and the Eleusinian mysteries. Emerson would himself write homages to the Eleusinian mysteries and advance the philosophy of post-morality writing in his 1841 essay, Self-Reliance.
If I am the devil's child, I will live then from the devil.
In his 1841 short story, Never Bet the Devil Your Head, Poe's character, Mr. Toby Dammit, is described as a mystic transcendentalist with a proclivity to over-exaggerate and foolishly bets his head to the devil. Before the devil arrives on a bridge in the appearance of an old man walking under an arch wearing a mason's apron to oversee the decapitation of the unfortunate Mr. Dammit, Poe's narrator aims several attacks at Kant and Carlyle by name and says, "Is it not impossible that he was affected with the Transcendentals?" Poe's inclusion of the Masonic apron and the arch motifs associated with the figure of the devil on the bridge are direct references to Masonic symbolism, with emphasis on the Royal Arch ritual that was a principal characteristic of the English Freemasonic Lodge structure. This system had begun deeply penetrating the young USA through the York Rite and Scottish Rites, both of which supported Emerson throughout his career. When Emerson returned from his 1833 trip to Europe as the official literary agent for Thomas Carlyle, he first established himself in the Concord, Massachusetts, and became a member of a group known as the Social Circle. This group was run by Concord Democratic Party controller, Senator Francis Gorgas, who became close to Emerson. Gorgas's uncle just so happened to be a man named John James Joseph Gorgas, then head of the northern jurisdiction of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, which, along with the British-run York Rite, was overseeing a takeover of U.S. Masonic lodges at the time. The Scottish Rite inserted itself into the young USA officially in 1801 through the secret police headquarters in Charlestown, South Carolina. This new Masonic order had been established by an aristocratic Genevan soldier employed by the British Empire during the Revolutionary War, named Augustin Prévost. His Freemasonic secret order was not dismantled after the war as it should have been, and instead became the basis of a new Rosicrucian Templar Rite. It found protection under Aaron Burr, the vice president under Thomas Jefferson. Burr would attempt several dissolutions of the Union in 1800, 1804, and 1807. With the help of this influential apparatus, Burr became the leader of a significant political machine in New York, which spread to other states, dubbed Tammany Hall. Some tales which Poe wrote featuring direct, albeit subtle, references to occult masonry and its evils include the short tale of Ligeia, featuring an initiated fanatic of hidden mysteries who slowly murders his own wife with arsenic-laced wine, and the 1846 short story, The Cask of Amontillado. In The Cask of Amontillado, Poe features a dim-witted Freemason by the name of Fortunato, falling for a trap set by an evil protagonist named Trezor, who dupes the fool into descending into a crypt deep underground in pursuit of a taste of a rare Amontillado wine. Once sufficiently drunk, and having descended a spiral staircase into a crypt 4 feet deep, 3 feet wide, and 7 feet high between two large columns, Trezor chains his victim and proceeds to build a wall 13 layers of brick high to the piercing screams of Fortunato. As Freemasonic scholar Darren A. Linares has pointed out in Edgar Allan Poe's perverse Masonic degree, The Cask of Amontillado, the elements of Poe's tale leading to the gruesome murder are a direct parallel to the reenactment of the second section of the Fellowcraft degree in Freemasonry when performed in reverse order. Poe's stories indicate that he was well aware of the Masonic influences infiltrating America's institutions and the kind of sordid deeds they were capable of. In How to Write a Blackwood Article and A Predicament, Poe mocked the figure of Margaret Fuller, another disciple of Carlyle and Emerson, who became one of the most famous transcendentalists in the 1840s. In both short stories, Poe hilariously parodies Fuller using his character Suki Snobbs, aka Psyche Zenobia, an arrogant Blackwoods magazine writer who takes herself far too seriously.
I presume everybody has heard of me. My name is Signora Psyche Zenobia. This I know to be a fact. Nobody but my enemies ever calls me Suki Snobs. I have been assured that Suki is but a vulgar corruption of psyche, which is good Greek, and means the soul. That's me. I'm all soul. And sometimes a butterfly.
While laying out the guidelines for writing a spiritual article for Blackwood, Snobbs writes,
If you know any big words, this is your chance for them. Talk of the Ionic and Eleatic schools, of Archytas, Georgius, and Alcmaeon. Say something about objectivity and subjectivity. Be sure and abuse a man named Locke. Turn up your nose at things in general, and when you let slip anything a little too absurd, you need not be at the trouble of scratching it out, but just add a footnote. This would look erudite and frank.
In A Predicament, Snobb's devotion to radical sensualism results in her trying to describe each sensation of her head getting cut off by the arms of a massive clock, and then philosophizing about whether her spirit exists in her severed head or body. The decapitated character says,
I will candidly confess that my feelings were now of the most singular, nay, of the most mysterious, the most perplexing and incomprehensible character. My senses were here and there at one and the same moment. With my head, I imagined at one time that I, the head, was the real Signora Psyche Zenobia, At another, I felt convinced that myself, the body, was the proper identity. To clear my ideas on this topic, I felt in my pocket for my snuff box, but upon getting it and endeavoring to apply a pinch of its grateful contents in the ordinary manner, I became immediately aware of my peculiar deficiency and threw the box at once down to my head.
In her 1841 Transcendentalist Manifesto, Margaret Fuller lived up to Poe's satire by repeatedly speaking self-referentially of her own enlightenment and re-emphasized Carlyle's thesis that intellect was incompatible with divine understanding, saying,
The intellect has no answer to this question, yet as we through faith and purity of deed enter into the nature of the divine, it is answered from our own experience. We understand, though we cannot explain the mystery of something gained where all already is.
By imposing this dichotomy between the understanding and intellect, Fuller was not only situating herself as a disciple of Carlyle and Kant, but also the cult of Gnosticism that pervaded early Christianity prior to the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. Margaret Fuller, who called her mentor Emerson my druid, described her own syncretic ideal for a new world spirituality, writing in her Transcendentalist Credo,
I have no trouble so far from the sacrifice required of Abraham. It as prefiguring a thought to be fully expressed by the death of Christ. Yet forget not that they who passed their children through the fire to Moloch were pious also, and not more superstitious than an exclusive devotion to Christ has made many of his followers. Do you not place Christ, then, in a higher place than Socrates, for instance, or Michelangelo? Yes, because if his life was not truer, it was deeper, and he is a representative of ages. But then I consider the Greek Apollo as one also.
Fuller strangely praises the story of Abraham's willingness to commit child sacrifice and God's sacrifice of Jesus, making a point to equate these instances of sacrifice with the faith of those who committed mass child sacrifices to the ancient deity Moloch, which poured innocent blood across pagan altars of Phoenicia for centuries. Is it any wonder, then, that Fuller considered the Pythian solar deity Apollo at the heart of the ancient system of oracles as co-equivalent to the figure of Jesus? Before Henry David Thoreau wrote his environmentalist Bible, Walden, he wrote of his ideal pagan revival in his 1849 A Week on the Concord and Merrimack Rivers.
In my pantheon, Pan still reigns in his pristine glory, with his ruddy face, his flowing beard and his shaggy body, his pipe and his crook, his nymph Echo and his chosen daughter Iambe. For the great god Pan is not dead, as was rumored. No god ever dies. Perhaps, of all the gods of New England and of ancient Greece, I am most constant at his shrine.
It must be recalled that Pan, adored by Thoreau and Fuller, embodied more than a mythical creature. He was a universal archetype of hedonism that shaped the ancient pagan mysteries. Old Pan, the shepherd's god, had a half-human, half-animal shape, bearded, horned, and hairy, lively, Agile, swift, and crafty, he expressed animal cunning. He preyed sexually upon nymphs and boys indifferently, and after the 5th century, his image became the incarnation of the horned Satan, adored by medieval witch covens, and even the androgynous image of Baphomet, worshipped by Templar initiates. Pan became associated not only with a rampant hedonism, but also child molestation and even sacrifice across the ages. The fusing of the sacred and profane embodied by Pan was also featured in those Apollo sun god Dionysus lunar deity rituals, which formed the backbone of the rites of Eleusis. Thoreau's mentor Ralph Waldo Emerson himself embraced both nature worship and pagan ideals devoid of a sense of duty to or love of humankind. Instead, Emerson's transcendental gospel was centered around the individual's desires before everything, stating that each human aims to be somebody set up for himself to truck and higgle for a private good, and in particulars, to ride that he may ride, to dress that he may be dressed, to eat that he may eat, and to govern that he may be seen. In Emerson's thesis of the Oversoul, any moral, reasonable, directing influence to the universe was replaced by a vague energy flow of each element within creation, exerting its desire to be, devoid of any elements of justice, which resulted in all being co-equal to all, and the Oversoul, aka all, being co-equal with each thing in reality. It wasn't hard for Emerson to make the Kabbalistic leap to conclude that the initiated elite of Emerson's Masonic societies are, in all seriousness, God. Not a divine being made in the image of God, but rather God itself. And that brings us to one of Poe's most famous fictional tales. In Poe's short story, The Murder of Marie Roget, published in 1842, Inspector C. Auguste Dupin is challenged to solve the mysterious murder of a beautiful young woman in Paris. Poe's fictional narrative was actually based on events surrounding the very real 1841 murder of a New York woman named Marie Cecilia Rogers, who had worked as a cigar girl in a popular New York lounge run by John Anderson. Anderson was a leading figure within the Freemasonic Tammany Hall political machine that installed President Andrew Jackson into the White House in 1832. Anderson's cigar emporium happened to be an intelligence hub frequented by leading members of the intelligentsia. On July 25, 1841, Marie Rogers told her fiancé, Daniel Payne, who also lived with Mary in a boarding house managed by Mary and her mother, that she was about to visit her aunt and would return that evening. 3 days later, the heavily decayed body of Marie Cecilia Rogers was discovered floating in the Hudson River next to a strange location dubbed Sybil's Cave, located on the estate owned by an illustrious New Jersey family. Beyond the obvious decay, her body was tied with rope and beaten beyond recognition with signs of extreme sexual violation. It didn't take long for every press outlet of New York to run sensationalist stories about her murder, turning her death into a national obsession. It was the first case of a national media hysteria surrounding a violent murder mystery in U.S. history. However, when we scratch beyond the surface of this murder case, and Poe's short story specifically, a much darker picture emerges. showcasing evidence of the occult takeover of the USA that was already underway during Poe's lifetime. Edgar Allan Poe didn't want anyone to be confused about the real-life story behind his fictional tale, writing in the story's introduction,
The extraordinary details which I am now called upon to make public will be found to form, as regards sequence of time, the primary branch of a series of scarcely intelligible coincidences, whose secondary or concluding branch will be recognized by all readers in the late murder of Mary Cecilia Rogers at New York.
Many Americans reading the popular press, especially Horace Greeley's New York Tribune, were quick to blame Mary's fiancé, Daniel Payne, as the guilty party in the heinous crime. Despite having an alibi, Payne was demonized across the press, and on October 8, 1841, the same date of Poe's death exactly 8 years later, his dead body was also found lying on a bench next to Sybil's Cave in New Jersey. Next to his body was a broken vial of laudanum, a fast-working poison, with a note in his pocket reading,
"To the world, here I am on the spot. God forgive me for my misfortune in my misspent time."
Was Payne's death a suicide, as popularly believed? Was he party to the murder of his fiancée and killed himself out of guilt? However, like the narrative of Mary Rogers, even here the popular explanation for his death doesn't add up, as the coroner conducting Payne's autopsy discovered no sign of laudanum in his body and could not account for the actual cause of death. For months, other press agencies blamed street gangs as the culprit, while other newspapers even promoted the narrative that Mary Rogers was still alive, since the body was supposedly too far decomposed to be properly identified. More than 1 year later, in October 1842, a woman named Frederica Laws, who was an owner of a tavern near the site of Mary's murder, was accidentally shot by one of her sons. Laws had been in the public eye since Mary's body was first discovered, as Laws had apparently witnessed the young girl in her tavern with a mysterious man the night of her death, and it was one of the Laws's sons who discovered Mary's clothes in some bushes weeks after the killing. Among Laws's final words before dying, she indicated that Mary Rogers had died during a failed abortion that took place at her tavern a year earlier. Laws's deathbed testimony became the final word on Mary's death, and since that time, all experts have come to the consensus that Mary Rogers had died during an abortion. Case closed. However, if this were so, then why was her face beaten beyond recognition? Why were there strangulation wounds around her neck? Why the extreme mutilation of her abdomen and womb? Why the strange death of her fiancé just 2 months later at the same location? Clearly, things weren't adding up. Edgar Poe had every reason to believe another darker picture was afoot, and while he admitted that there was more to the story than the facts which he revealed in The Murder of Marie Roget, the larger pattern of events surrounding Mary's murder led the mind to grapple with a much darker and disturbing picture surrounding the murder of the beautiful cigar girl. But why Mary? Why was this young lady chosen for a heinous crime? Was there any particular reason to select Mary for a possible ritual murder? Well, what if we said Mary wasn't your typical beautiful cigar girl? To address this darker picture, we'll have to reevaluate the environment in which Mary worked in New York and the location in which she died. Doug McGowan.
All right. I think that was a perfect place to pause this film and then encourage people, hopefully now that the fires are raging inside your soul, to figure out what made Mary Rogers so peculiar and so special, such that she was found to be targeted for this ritual murder at this particular location of Sybil's Cave. I hope that everyone's desire is very, very intense right now to go and click on the link under in the comments section under the video on Rumble, or in the comments section here in the chat area. I also included a link there, and watch the full film tonight after this show is over. And look who just walked in as well. I've just noticed that Cynthia is here right now. How you doing, Cynthia?
I'm doing really good.
How did you feel watching the half the film again with your narration?
I think it's really great. Really happy with how it turned out. And,
yeah, me too.
Script is fantastic, Matt.
Thank you. And we were blessed that David actually was able to rise to the occasion and develop some skills that we didn't think that he actually had. David is our friend. I think some people who watch the show on a regular basis remember a few weeks back we aired a film called The Devil at Woodstock, and David was my guest because he made the film and he wrote it. And we've always known him as a poet and an essayist, but turns out he actually has a penchant for working with AI and multimedia. So this is a fun production. I was really happy to see it. Let me ask you this. So at this point, when did you wake up to the reality that Poe is so much more than the sort of dark figure that we all thought he was before we got political, before we got more aware of how the world actually works? What was your particular wake up?
I guess my entry point was actually through Friedrich Schiller first. And by that point, I had already also found out that Mozart was actually pretty political. Mm-hmm. And his operas actually had political messages in them. And his Magic Flute is also about the battle of a better form of Freemasonry. But it's these kinds of things, because they were so controversial, they're done in a very non-linear way. The later Shakespeare plays too, I have a feeling I still don't understand them, but the later Shakespeare plays are amongst the zaniest things that he wrote. And there are clear, like, you could say, a form of code, a form of getting a message across that is in a nonlinear way. So with Schiller, he actually did a really good piece called Ghostseer, which I would really recommend people read that. Unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be any kind of film that was done on it, but it definitely deserves one. Maybe we'll do something in the future, but that would be a huge project. And I don't think he fully finished it either, but it still works the way it ends. And it's just a really high level piece on how Venetian intelligence worked to completely, do basically the psyop on a German prince, and got him to totally adopt all of his philosophies, all of his viewpoints on religion and politics and everything, ended up being affected through a multi-phase psyop with this guy. And it's done really, really well. And, there are seances involved. There's magic involved, or false magic, illusion. And then you get into a darker and darker, a story with what this guy is being brought into. So with Schiller, he is, I think, the most transparent with the politics in his plays and his poetry. So that when I started to read Poe again, because I think I started to read Poe a lot like a lot of people, you start reading him when you're a teenager, but you don't really know very much as a teenager. And so you're just taking it sort of literal, and there's something fascinating about it. But I was never able to fully pinpoint exactly what was the brilliance of Poe, and then revisiting him after going through, especially the works of Schiller, but Shakespeare, Mozart, all of these things helped. I realized that he had a bunch of clues for us as well to understand them. And for me, it was the imp of the perverse, where his mentioning of phrenology. And then I looked up phrenology, and I realized like the whole thing was a joke, the imp of the perverse. So it had like a gruesome murder in it. But if you were to actually understand all of the clues he gave you of this person who's gone completely insane is sharing with you very candidly their thought process. And because you don't know that this person has committed a murder, you don't know that they're insane, you're just kind of taking it in and listening to their philosophy, their general philosophy on things. And then you realize at a certain point, oh my God, this person is like absolutely insane. And then they say the reason of their undoing was actually their conscience. And so it was a big joke that Paul had made on people who get sucked into that form of thinking. And then I realized that all of those short stories, like The Black Cat, The Telltale Heart, they all had that core theme in them.
Right. Because like phrenology, and it's something I had read that play or that short story a couple of times before you brought that to my attention, and you did a wonderful class on it. I missed the word phrenology. I always read right over that. Like I didn't think that was important until you brought it all together in your presentation, because that was really a theory that was trying to explain the cause of evil and deviancy, right? The idea that there is like a science of the shape of the skull. And that was a big thing. That was like a precursor to eugenics, that you could find the physiological contours or something like that would explain why moral deviancy exists. And the fact that Poe's taken a shot at that, but then showcasing a deeper analysis or appreciation for what causes somebody to do something profane and evil. And I was hoping maybe you could say something a little bit more about how is Poe, because people could say, well, Sigmund Freud is like a great antidote to the materialist, behaviorist, phrenologist types who are looking for a material cause of evil or something. Maybe Freud is a more healthy counter reaction to that does a better job of explaining the cause of evil psychologically. But I don't think you buy that. And I was wondering, how do you think that Poe is introduced something that's even superior than all of that?
Well, I think that for a lot of things, like even the supernatural, like I think it's become popular again to talk about, like the role of angels and demons and things like this too on our reality or ourselves. And, with AI as well, people are questioning what is reality? What is the environment that we are navigating through? That's in some ways looking so controlled. All of the information we are receiving is somehow being controlled. Either you believe from a technological standpoint or supernatural standpoint. I don't mean like anyone specifically, but just in general, these things are becoming more prevalent. And I think that with psychoanalysis, that was also an issue that, Carl Jung was also really into these kind of Eleusinian mysteries, which Matt goes into detail in his book trilogy.
I'm right here.
I'm talking to the people as well.
Oh, okay.
I'm oriented towards the audience right now.
Oh, okay, I'm with you.
The psychoanalysis, not that it doesn't have any uses or the field of psychology doesn't have its uses, but I think that when you become too focused on the external in whatever way, right? So whether it be oh, this is what my experience was growing up in my family or with like my childhood friends or this childhood event, or it's the technological takeover where, you know, kids are being hooked into phones at a really early age at this point. These things all have effects. Or whether you believe in the supernatural, the problem in putting emphasis on the external is that you are taking away from your own decision-making process and your free will. And I do think that, you know, it's not just Christianity that has this as a focal point, but it is a focal point in Christianity, this emphasis on free will. And I think that that is a really core concept that we sometimes, you know, it's easy to kind of overlook the importance of what that really means to have free will over even like to question, how am I formulating the ideas, the hypotheses, the opinions that I'm forming? Because especially now with the information overload, it's so easy for these things to just kind of pour into you. And you maybe even thought, oh, I did form this opinion on my own, but you didn't really, if you were to backtrack all of the steps of how this became something, especially repetition, you know, the repetition of something sometimes can give the idea of a discovery process, and that didn't happen. So Poe, again, is very focused on that process of psychology and of mind. Poe's pieces are actually incredibly insightful in human psychology, but he was focused a lot on the negative part of that, right? Like when you go down a certain road, if you were to complete the thought experiment, you know, so to speak, these are the things that will eventually happen, because we still ultimately live in a world that has certain kinds of buffers around us, like especially like, you know, suburbia living, or, you know, there are certain things that kind of allow us to not sometimes fully experience the full conclusions of some of the opinions we hold. And I think that's why in our world right now, where people are becoming more and more radically divided, and they're really disagreeing with each other, but we're still largely in the realm of words, right? When we're disagreeing with people, we haven't really gone through, well, what is the ultimate, you know, consequence to this frame of thinking versus this frame of thinking, so that we can really have a discussion that can produce something constructive towards solution orientation to very real problems.
Yeah.
So again, I think that Poe has a very good psychology, because he focuses on how we need to be aware of how these decisions are being made within us, and that conscience plays a central role. Like we actually do have a form of a Jiminy Cricket in us. And that is a strange thing to think about, that everyone has like a voice that will sometimes be like, you probably shouldn't do that, or, you know, that's not a good thing to be doing, or like, why do we have that kind of, you know, feeling or voice within us?
Right. No, these are great points. And yeah, I think without that sense of the conscience, then free will doesn't mean very much, right? You have to have a sense that our soul yearns to be itself, which is to be good, because we were made good, that the universe is good and we're part of the universe, that the creator's essence of goodness and greatness flows through all parts of creation. And so there must be something that is naturally in us that yearns to be good, and that a healthy person would identify as conscience and treat as a real thing, whereas a sick person, a spiritually sick person, would maybe misidentify what this thing is that scratches on them when they do something wrong or hurt somebody thoughtlessly. They would misidentify that as maybe a demon or some force that's preventing them from doing what they want to do. And I guess that's
in the perverse, he imagined, right, that some imp And people should look this up, on the internet. If you look up like an imp, and they have like these drawings of this thing that is supposed to come to you like when you're sleeping, and it kind of like sits over top of you or like on the bed creepily. This guy was imagining that his undoing and why he was arrested for this perfect murder that he committed, right, with the poison candles. What caused him to blurt out his crime in public was that some imp had slapped him on the back of on his back and caused him to lose his mind and confess. But in reality, it was his conscience, but he imagined it as an external force that acted upon him. Again, interesting that Poe understood that like when you become so separated from your own internal dialogue, you can imagine that internal processes are actually external manifestations that are working on you. And it's like that with the black cat, right? The guy goes crazy thinking this black cat is resurrected, keeps coming back, even though he's killed the black cat. Next day it's showing up again. It has like the eye that was removed, and he's going nuts thinking that this black cat knows, and he buries his wife's body in the wall and realizes that the cat was in the wall too, and that's how the people find out that he murdered his wife and put her in the wall. It's often showing as like an external manifestation when in reality it was in that person's mind the whole time.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's a great point. Or the telltale heart that we talked about ever so briefly in the film is another example of that, right? Like the beating of the heart. At first you think like, how could this guy's dead? How could his heart be beating under the floorboards and the cops are already in the house? This guy has some sort of a weird compulsion to invite the cops into the house, even though they have, they pretty much believe his story after he did this perfect crime and chopped up this old guy's body. And he ends up just breaking down completely and basically admitting his guilt completely outside, is beside himself, misdiagnosing like, well, what is the cause of what's making him now face the consequence of his actions, of defying justice, of defying his conscience, of misdiagnosing his conscience as something other than what it is, or this imp, that's making us do these things. So I think it's a very important idea that we tell lies to ourselves, right? Like because we have free will, we have a freedom to tell lies to others and to ourselves. And when we start doing that, we create our identities, how we see ourselves, our purpose is shaped by those stories, those lies. And then consequences happen when we have a false identity that's dislodged from reality, right? And usually those consequences are never good. And natural law is never satisfied when we deviate and become deviant in that sense and become instruments of our own doom and the doom of others. So I think that you're right, that's a great thing that Schiller does in the Ghost Seer story too. And we all know that Edgar Allan Poe adored Schiller. He studied his poetry. He praised him. And in Schiller's Ghost Seer, he's doing the same thing, like you said, showcasing the story of how this German prince, who's clearly a bit of a doofus, who's maybe well-intended, but a doofus who thinks way too highly of himself, is targeted clearly for an intelligence operation to be psychologically deconstructed when he's on vacation in Venice. And all of the, like you just said, right, all of these things happen to him. He has no idea why these seemingly supernatural things are occurring to him, but it's done specifically to break him apart psychologically and then rebuild him from basically a blank slate almost, resulting in him becoming a weapon that would then finally be sent back to Germany to be a tool for the Venetians in their ongoing
lighting
wars.
the 30 years war of the Protestant versus Catholic slaughter.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
I have a paper on this for those who want to look more into it on my Substack. So I did do a class for Rising Tide, and there's a transcript version of it as well.
Well, I think that would be a good follow-up for people who watch the Edgar Allan Poe film and want to really get even deeper into this realm of understanding how to properly combat evil the way these high literary geniuses were able to do it in their insightful, apparent fictional tales, but that were actually embedding a lot of truth and exposing a lot of evil, your essay and your lecture, I think, would be a really nice follow-up experience. So what I'll do as soon as we're done today, I'll put a link to your Ghost Seer film and essay or video and essay in the comments section, because I really do want people to watch that as well. And it also ties directly into like Cooper, right? Like even James Fenimore Cooper who was friends with Poe, who was working with Poe, and who's going to come up in the second half of the Poe film as people watch it.
Brought up right in this documentary that Griswold somehow was in charge of both Poe and James Fenimore Cooper's, work after they had died. In the case of both probably murdered, by the way.
Mm-hmm. Could you maybe say something quickly about, because I know you've done work on James Fenimore Cooper's work exposing Venice. Could you maybe say a little word to tease the audience about some of that too, and what he was doing in showcasing the nature of Venetian operations and things like the Bravo?
Sure. I did also a class on the James Fenimore Cooper work, the Bravo, that also focuses on the Venetian intelligence technique for Rising Tide, and it's also available on my Substack. I will just say very quickly, it is the only work that I've read that I think goes through the actual system, like how it was organized within Venice as an intelligence apparatus, but through a work of art and fiction. But it's actually it's like a guidebook, actually, as to how Venetian intelligence worked, but within a drama where we have characters who are also being they're being manipulated by the Venetian intelligence within this storyline to also get us further insight into how they play around with the people who are living in this region and beyond, right? Venice's grasp was like Europe and Asia. They were basically, a sort of like Temple of Delphi, where they had the intelligence of I would say most of the important things going on in both continents. The Venetians were aware. They had their spies everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I just put a link to your Bravo and to James and to the Ghost Seer essay also in the comment section and chat box too. Again, we really want people, because at the end of the day, right? Why do we do these things? Why did you do this? Why did Cooper and Poe and Schiller do what they did? It's because at the heart of this fight is epistemological warfare. There's a cultural war, which is super important for people to grasp. And often we skip those steps of not appreciating how highly valued the oligarchy places culture and their battle, their ability to control the levers of aesthetics, of moral insights that really shape, right, the climate in which each one of our souls is groomed and is organized as we become hopefully citizens. But to be a citizen, truly a citizen that takes responsibility for your society and fights to defend your rights and improve upon them against those who would rather take them away, requires a deep insight and understanding both into the nature of evil, but also into the nature of human folly and what allows us to become the instruments of our own self-doom, which is what subjects always are. Subjects are people who don't take responsibility properly for their minds, for their conscience, for the society that they're a part of. They don't take the time to understand things that they could understand if they used their God-given reason properly. And so they become subject to taking on false identities, false narratives, right, with actions that flow out of those fallacies that result in leading that society into cataclysm. Whereas in the case of Poe, he was looking at a world which was quickly becoming ripe for a civil war, right? And that's where we were able to infuse the discussion of like
your book, your Poe book. Do you want to show? You don't have it available?
Oh, I do have it. It's right here. Yes.
Yeah.
This is the Poe book. This is the
Volume 3.
Revenge of the Mystery Cults, Volume 3, Edgar Poe's Final Mystery and Other Tales of Ratiocination. Yeah, and in it, like, I mean, the whole point was to get across like how these transcendentalists were essentially the assets of this Palmerston Mazzini Freemasonic agency that you've also written quite about in your Mafia Brotherhood series, but that the young Europe movement of anarchists that would weaponize young people who are dumb and use them as a mob to overthrow governments that they didn't like, that the oligarchy didn't like, was also done to the United States in the form of the young America movement of the South and of the North, and that Emerson represented the northern branch of this thing, designed to essentially create an unworkable condition in which a civil war had to happen that would cannibalize the USA, or have the USA cannibalize itself and rip itself apart in order to be reabsorbed back into the global system of this world Pax Britannia empire, right?
Disclaimer, not that young people are dumb, but that young people are almost always like, they're firecrackers, right? They want to get stuff done. They're the ones that are like, and rightfully so, like, you're really pissed at how the world is and you want to correct it. But if you don't have enough understanding as to the environment that you're operating in, it's very easy to be a pawn in someone else's game, is the point.
That's so much more diplomatically said. I got a comment here from somebody named V Idiot. Is this person's name? V Idiot writes, Edgar Allan Poe used to do cocaine and then would climb into his attic and do his creative writings and poetry. Just stating a factoid. Don't care what he did, actually. So that's what V Idiot, who that was actually what they self-named themselves. So do you want to comment or a response to that?
It seems like he doesn't care about all of the other stuff we're mentioning, but does care that he like so-called did cocaine. I think that Dave Gosselin, he actually has done a great paper that we published on our Rising Tide website that addresses some of these, like where the root of some of these rumors, gossips have occurred about Poe, and it's all like just made up. It's very disappointing that they were allowed to just be promoted like that. Again, Griswold was someone who was in charge. Of. Sorry, I'm having problems here with my Windows. Who was in charge of his legacy and was very much a part of spreading those kinds of rumors. But so was Charles Baudelaire also, who, as Dave says, seemed to have been self-projecting a bit because Baudelaire was a real drug addict and hedonist. But there's no proof. Like these people, like in the case of Baudelaire, he writes that Poe must have been doing a lot of drugs because someone could not have written what Poe had written if they were not on drugs. Like this has been the line. There's absolutely nothing to prove and to back this. And also, Poe wasn't just someone writing, stuck away somewhere in his attic. He was also in Europe. He was in France doing intelligence work. And he was also with West Point. Which people never bring up, like that part of his life. Like it wasn't like he was born rich and could just like, do cocaine and whiskey all day and lived in this like, really comfy, sweet, mansion or something. He was actually working in espionage. So was James Fenimore Cooper. And there's a lot of proof of their networks overlapping in France because they were working on trying to have a French republic. The French also were very interested in having a French republic.
Right. Don't say too much on this because this is exactly where we're going in the next half of the movie that people still have to watch. So we don't want to spoil too much of work. But that being said, yes, absolutely. I think it was Alan Salisbury's, it must have been, Alan Salisbury's work that I think fully helped nail my understanding of Poe most concretely in his 1978 or something that he wrote The Purloined Life of Edgar Allan Poe research, where he identified and this is a researcher who used to work very closely. He passed away in 1992 of cancer, but he was an African-American researcher who did just magnificent work uncovering the American system networks that were organizing around Abraham Lincoln, and internationally in the 19th century. He also did this pioneering work identifying that Poe was a part of these counterintelligence patriotic networks tied to the Society of Cincinnati that had, grown out of the American Revolution and had these huge operations in Europe around Marquis de Lafayette. So I think that was a big mind-blowing thing that could be proven. I didn't think that such a thing could be anything more than speculation, but he proves it and demonstrates exactly that this is exactly what Poe was a part of, and what you just went through as a dynamic of these patriots working to overthrow the hereditary systems of Europe as well as the United States, and create a culture that would be capable of self-government and republicanism in the best sense of the word. And that would make history classes so interesting if we were able to study this sort of thing this way in school and high school. And my God, I wouldn't have failed so much. There's another person who wrote, just quickly.
Is there another show after us, or?
No, I just got a notification from Gordon. Well, it didn't just happen. 20 minutes ago, Gordon messaged me saying that the Book of Trump won't be happening tonight. Okay. So we don't have that hard stop that I thought there was, but we will stop soon, I promise. And because I do want people to spend the rest of the night watching the rest of the Poe film and then sharing it. That's the important thing.
Right. You didn't promote our Rising Tide YouTube channel, did you? Did you mention the Rising Tide YouTube channel?
People should go to yes, I linked it. I linked it in the comment section, in the chat section, and that's where people can watch the film, going to our Rising Tide Foundation YouTube channel, and also our Rising Tide Foundation Substack. And that's really, if people subscribe to that, they're going to get a lot of big surprises in their inboxes on a regular basis of just incredible essays and insightful discoveries that a lot of incredible researchers that we know have made and that we put out on our platform, as well as films and lectures and stuff too. You want to say something maybe about what we're going to do as a, should we say this now, or should we leave it hanging?
Yeah, you should, because it's your story on Jack the Ripper.
You read my mind.
Yeah, you should do it.
Yeah, you read my mind. Jack the Ripper. So people might want to keep in mind, and this is actually, if they don't want to wait, it's probably going to be many more months, maybe 6 or 7 months until we actually can produce the next sequel film with David Gosselin, which is going to be on the next phase of the story after the Poe tale is finished, and we unveil the real reason why Mary Rogers was ritualistically murdered at Sybil's Cave in New Jersey, and what that means. And then we're going to go into the next phase of the story by looking at the Jack the Ripper tale, a real tale of true crime from a completely fresh angle. And if you don't want to wait those 6 or 7 months for that film to come out, little shameless plug here. It's in that book. It's in the last 6 chapters of this book on Revenge of the Mystery Cults, Volume 3. So that's something to keep in mind. But it's going to get wild, and it does bring in hardcore Freemasonic elements. It brings in the Royal Arch Freemasonry rites, which have a big connection to Solomon's Temple, and the fanatics who have been obsessed with rebuilding Solomon's Temple as part of like an eschatological ritual that involves some form of mass sacrifice, particularly in that region of the Holy Land in the Middle East, which certain individuals like Sir Charles Warren was in charge of as one of the top Grand Masters with Edward VII, while he was also in charge of the Metropolitan Police of England, overseeing the Whitechapel murders of these prostitutes. And that also has something to do with the probable, I think very, very conclusively, truthfully, ritual murder of the firstborn son of Queen Victoria, Prince Albert Victor, who people have falsely identified as being the guy who fell in love with a prostitute and had a secret marriage, and they had to kill the witnesses. And that was actually the Hollywood film that starred Johnny Depp. What was it called?
From Hell, I think.
Right. Right. And they took that actual story, which has a lot of truth, because it does involve a ritual murder, and it does involve the royal family, and it does involve Freemasonry. Those are all true things, but it introduces a lot of fallacy, because Prince Albert Victor, who also dies a very convenient death in like 1890, or like right after the ritual murders occur, he's a flaming homosexual. He has no interest in women. And even if he was a decadent heterosexual, if he was that, these are slum prostitutes over the age of 45, 50 years old in the ghettos of Whitechapel, meaning they probably didn't have teeth. They probably looked like 30 years older than they actually were, and had their, it's a terrible thing. The life of a prostitute in England slums in those days was a terrible thing. That would not be what a royal decadent person would go for. So there's something else going on, which I think we prove pretty well, and we're going to get into it in that upcoming film, that is tied to the creation of the State of Israel. There, I said it. I said it. Somebody just mentioned that they loved Ralph Waldo Emerson until they started getting introduced to this angle. Did you also like the Transcendentalists when you were younger? Was that something that you were close to, Thoreau and Emerson and company and Fuller?
No, I actually didn't read anything about that, but I they try to get you through the Albert Camus route, and like the Ernest Hemingway, like that sort of existentialist route, I think is really common. And I was put on that through the internet. I made the mistake when I was young to, like a teenager, asking the internet, what are good philosophy books? And so they recommended nothing but existentialist books.
Yeah, I remember trying to read Walden a little bit, because a few of my friends were very influenced by that, and I was tired of being the dumb guy in the room, so I was trying to, in high school, read that, and I just couldn't quite get into it. But it was very influential, and I know a lot of these transcendentalists are mandatory reading for many, many, many people in high school. And also, like a lot of the stories by Poe, there's some really famous stories. We mentioned the Black Cat, the Telltale Heart. They're provided, largely as interesting scenarios of the macabre or something. But a lot of his other, so one, there's like no context over like, why is he doing these stories and the way he's doing them? There's no context. Number two, a lot of his stories, most people, even people who really like Poe, don't know that he did them. Or like these essays like Eureka, his appraisal of the metaphysical and material unification of the or foundations of the universe, as he calls it, a prose poem.
Well, that would ruin his whole drug addict rock and roller slander that they try to say. Like, you can't have someone who's like driving themselves insane and obsessed with like the morbid and the grotesque writing something like Eureka or Molonta Tota as another thing, which makes it very clear that he is very critical of the Aristotelian philosophical camp. And again, like, what are the consequences? We don't realize how much the world we live in today is constructed around these frameworks, whether you care or not.
Right, which gets us back to the questions of the will to the free choice we have to choose bad methods of thinking. Because in Molonta Tota and Eureka, he's introducing these fallacious paths that wear the appearance of being useful and true, but they're actually designed to enslave us if we choose to adopt them. And he has I don't know if you want to say anything about the two false paths that he illustrates, or.
No, we'll leave it for people. Again, like the class that I did on Poe, it goes over this. But yeah, I think we've given people a lot to chew on.
I think you're right. I think we did too. So the homework assignment, guys, everybody out there, is finish watching.
Movie night turned into homework assignment.
Okay, I shouldn't call it homework. All right. Well, feed the flame. Feed it because you're going to be happy discovering what you're about to discover about what Poe is doing and what he was battling and the legacy that he has given all of us as a gift. And I think after this, you're going to want to revisit a lot of Poe's short stories and poems with a completely fresh new set of eyes that I think will make you very happy. And also Cynthia's work, her lectures and essays on James Fenimore Cooper's The Bravo and Schiller's The Ghost Seer specifically. Check that stuff out in the description box under this video. Buy the books. I got to say it again. The Revenge of the Mystery Cult trilogy is a labor of love. And there's a lot in there that I think is going to really empower people to navigate through the shitstorm that's befallen us.
And people can also just get a paid subscription to your Substack, and they get the PDF versions of everything that you've published, and also like invites and new films that are behind a paywall. You get all of that if you become a paid subscriber to Matt's Substack.
Thank you, baby. I appreciate that little plug. Very kind. All right, cool, guys. So everyone, I want you to enjoy the rest of your Monday nights, and we will tune back in next Monday for yet another film. I think next Monday we're going to do something special on fashion and the occult. It's gonna surprise a lot of people out there. So that'll be that's a little teaser. So tune back in next Monday at 6 p.m. and we'll watch another movie. All right. Take care, everyone.
Thank you so much for joining us, and don't forget to hit the thumbs up on this video. And a special thank you to all of our advertising partners. Please remember to shift your dollars to support those businesses that support Badlands Media.